to the State of the City pre-show. My name is Erik Hanberg, and I'm the host of the Citizen Tacoma podcast. On the podcast, I get to interview elected and community leaders about what's happening in our community. It's a really great place to nerd out about civic issues, and that's exactly what we're doing here tonight on the pre-show. We are previewing Mayor Victoria Woodards' State of the City conversation. Tonight's theme is Our Neighbors. The mayor will be discussing how our community is grappling with two connected issues, homelessness and historic increases in housing prices. My guest today to preview that conversation, we have Miriam Barnett, CEO of the YWCA. Welcome, Miriam.
Thank you so much.
And we're also joined by Jeff Robinson, Director of Community and Economic Development with the City of Tacoma. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Erik.
And of course, I am delighted that Mayor Victoria Woodards herself is here. Thank you for being here, Mayor.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you for being our host.
I'm excited to be here. So Miriam, I'd like to start with you. First, I want to acknowledge that you are retiring from the YWCA soon, and I want to pass on the appreciation for everyone for all you've done for the community. So thank you.
Very much. Appreciate it.
As we talk about homelessness and affordable housing, I want to check in on some of the programs that the YWCA offers. You have an emergency shelter for survivors of domestic violence and their children. What role does that shelter play in keeping people from falling into a cycle of homelessness?
So the shelter is instrumental in that journey from what could be homelessness to finding a home. Because when you flee domestic violence, you've left your home, right? And you're probably not safe to go back. So the whole time, once they arrive at our shelter in high trauma, right? Because they've just fled a very difficult situation and very scared, you know, they move into our shelter, they have a locking door, they have their own apartment, their own bathroom, their own kitchen, in which they can start to feel safe. Once that happens, then they can work with our staff on finding permanent home so that when they leave our shelter, it's a 90-day stay, they have a place to go to call their own. And, you know, that has become increasingly harder, as you can imagine, to find affordable housing for our residents of our shelter to move into a permanent home, which is actually why a number of years ago, we started dreaming big about building permanent housing so that we could actually be part of that solution instead of part of that problem and have more options for our clients when they're ready to leave our shelter.
Yeah, you just opened that new project, if I understand correctly, 54 units of affordable permanent housing. And I think that that's what we can see right behind you there. Yes. Can you share a little bit more details about that project and who it serves and how it helps?
Yeah, so this project did just open. We are fully leased. Let me say that again. We are fully leased. The phone rings off the hook every time I mention this housing, and it's driving my staff a little bit crazy. So yeah, it's permanent housing, so we probably won't have units. We already have a very big waiting list. We had over 300 applicants to get into this building. That shows the need very quickly. And people continue to call us, like I just said, every single day. It breaks my heart, really. But this housing is 54 units, studios to 3 bedrooms, and it is for primarily families and individuals who have and were immediately homeless. So they weren't homeless a year ago, they were homeless right now, currently. And so most of the tenants that I've met so far, which has been such a joy, such a complete joy, most of them were living in their cars or living in their vans. They weren't necessarily just living in the tents that we see on the street. So they're a little bit more invisible, right? When you're living in your car or your van. But I just can't even imagine what that's been like. And some of them have been doing so for many, many years. So this is the first time they've had a locking door of their own, a key to unlock, a bed to sleep in, and a beautiful, beautiful apartment with views. These are apartments with views for families that have been homeless. So it's making a real impact for those families, and just the difference that I can feel from one day that they move in where they're just a little bit overwhelmed to a few days later going back and talking to them and just seeing the difference a home makes is absolutely enriching and inspiring.
That's really, really wonderful work. It's interesting that you're doing work both with that are tackling the affordable housing crisis and the homelessness crisis, and a lot of agencies will focus on one or the other. Why are you doing work in both of those areas?
Well, primarily because when we have clients in our shelter, they are going to be homeless if we can't find them a permanent solution, or they're going to decide to go back to their abuser because that's, less scary maybe than being homeless. And we don't want that. That's not what we want for them. And so this was just a natural next step for us, in my opinion. Of course, we could never build enough housing to really be more a part of the solution that we'd like to be, but we wanted to be whatever part we could play, we wanted to play that. So we raised $23.2 million to build this building. And I just want people to know that if we can do it, you can do it. So I want other nonprofits out there to know it. I want developers to know it, that the difference you make will feed your soul the rest of your life. The difference that you will see as a result of your hard work. I say a lot, I think a lot. We had so many barriers to building this building, COVID being one of them. Can you imagine? Yeah. And all those horrible, worryful days are like, they're fading from my memory because it's being replaced by the, just by the tenants telling me their stories about the difference.
Wonderful. And the good memories that they're going to create there. That's
exactly.
Great to hear.
Yeah.
Mayor, I know that the city recently passed a 0.1% sales tax that's going to help fund even more affordable housing in the city. What is that going to do?
Absolutely. And Miriam, thank you. And congratulations on congratulations for you. Our community is sad, but happy for you. You've done a lot of great work. And as I answer that question, Erik, I just want to add that you've got, YWCA that built their project, Tacoma Housing Authority. Another great partner just completed a 64 unit project, the Rise at 19. Where 14 of those homes are focused on those transitioning from homelessness, and another 14 are focused on their disabled units. So again, great partners, but that 0.1% is going to allow us to work with great partners like Tacoma Housing Authority and the YWCA. The 0.1% we think will generate anywhere between $4 and $6 million a year. And it was a tough vote to take, but one thing that we do know is that this entire community understands that we have a housing crisis, housing affordability crisis. So a lot of people, both business and nonprofit developers and other organizations that serve our homeless community, we're very much in support of us passing this. But anyway, it'll generate $4 to $6 million a year, and we'll be able to use that to leverage that money to support projects. So what we know is for every dollar the city can invest in a project, we bring another 16 to 17 additional dollars of nonprofit or private development to the table. So it's going to allow us to help get more projects like what Miriam has done at the Y. We're going to be able to participate and get more projects like that built in Tacoma. And that money can help with permitting, it can help with infrastructure, it can help with the cost to build, because we know that's incredibly expensive right now. Right. But we are working on a plan right now, and I'm glad Jeff is here today, working on our plan right now that will include community input. It'll be focused in one of our committees here at the city, and it'll take a little bit to kind of flush out exactly how we want to spend the money, because we just passed it. But we will focus on helping. We've got a list of projects already that if we could support every single project, I think Jeff can tell you the numbers of units that we could have built if that were possible.
Thank you very much. And Jeff, that's a good time to segue over to you. So we do have an affordability crisis in our community right now, and there are really great examples of affordable housing being built. There's also a lot of market rate being built. Is it true that any level of housing helps this crisis at this point from a supply and demand perspective?
Oh, definitely. I think that, it's housing is built and provided on a continuum. So the things that Miriam spoke to in terms of emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and market rate housing, they all fit together in this continuum. And the more housing we can get built at every level only assists us in meeting the demands, current demands and future demands in the community.
That makes a lot of sense.
We're getting a lot of market rate housing built right now. In fact, over the last, since 2016, we've added about or will add by the end of the next year around 6,600 additional multifamily units, which is a 23% increase in the number of units that we have in the city. And that's across the continuum, more market than affordable. And that's why the 0.1% is so important, so that we can figure out a way to leverage these critical dollars to building affordable housing. The supply and demand equation is an interesting one because we can build a lot of market rate housing, but if we continue to have a lot of pressure coming with incoming residents and rents continue to rise, it changes the equation on how much impact those additional units will have. Sure. And that's why we have to be able to incentivize developers to build a portion of their units as affordable whenever they choose to build here in the city.
Well, and one of the tools you have in the tool belt to do that, as I understand it, is a multifamily tax credit exemption, where the developer gets some tax benefits in exchange for rent regulation, is the term that I've heard. How is that tool helping us help bridge that divide?
Well, many of the units that I spoke of, those 6,600 units, did take advantage of the multifamily tax exemption. So it's one tool in our toolbox. What it does is it freezes taxes on the improvements that are built as part of the development. The land continues to be taxed and can increase in value over the time of the exemption. The way it works is that 20%, a minimum of 20% of the units have to be affordable to a population at 80% or below the median income. And what affordability means, and in this regard, and the regulated units, as you referred to them, it means that the rents that are charged can only be 30% of the monthly median income of a household at 80% of the median. So there's a lot of percentages there. Right. It also has a utility allowance that goes along with it. So these units at 80% that will be regulated for 12 years, and now with the new bill that's been passed down at the legislature, we as a city can choose to extend that exemption for a continued affordability commitment for another 12 years, which will make it even a more valuable tool for us.
And you said most of those units that have been built are taking advantage of that tax credit?
Yes, they are. Yeah. And because they're being built in our mixed use centers where the exemption right now is available. As part of the Home in Tacoma effort that's underway right now and looking at ways to potentially increase density in the city, another thing that we're looking at is extending the multifamily tax exemption to other parts of the city, not just the mixed use centers, but along transit corridors and other places where we know there's a need for, and it makes a lot of sense to build additional units.
Sure. And if you're building in those mixed use centers, that makes transit better, walkable to businesses and restaurants, lots of good things that can happen with that, which, I know that there are some zoning changes under consideration at the council. Mayor, I'm curious if you could shed a little light on that. My understanding is that it might open up the opportunity for more housing options, like a mother-in-law unit in the back, or even small apartment buildings outside of those mixed-use centers, and relieve a little pressure on the market. Is that right?
That is the absolute goal. As a city who is built out, it's we're not making any more land, and so for a city who's built out, as our city continues to grow, we've got to look at other options. So duplex, fourplex, condos, apartment buildings, right? But we want to do it in a way that is responsible. So at Home in Tacoma has launched, and the Planning Commission will bring its recommendations here this month. Okay. To the council, and then they'll bring their first stack of recommendations, and the council will take a look at that, and then we will look at what we want to bring forward, and then that will go back out to community. So we're not done yet. The Planning Commission is just making its part of the recommendation, and then we'll take it back out into community for some really deep discussion, because we want to make sure that we're growing responsibly. We want to make sure that we still have single family home neighborhoods, but in places where it makes sense, in like Jeff said, on transit corridors, in our mixed use centers, where it makes sense for density, that we're putting density there. And also when we have these plats of land that we're doing the best we can with that plat of land, right? Because again, we're not making any more. But I also, Erik, just want to touch on something that Jeff said about affordability, because a lot of people are not supportive of the multifamily tax exemption because they think we're giving away dollars. And what I always want to remind people, because and I want to be very clear about what affordable is. So very quickly, they say we're giving away dollars, but most of these units would not have been built, and we're actually giving away a whole lot less than we make. So we're still continuing to make money on these projects, even though they won't be paying their taxes on the project. They are still paying everything they need to pay to build the project. They're still employing people. So there are all those taxes and money that we still collect from a project. But I think the thing that frustrates people is when we talk about affordability. And by state law, we have to use the county's number. So when we talk about area medium income or average medium income, we have to use a county's number. The county's number is clearly about 20% bigger than, maybe even 40% bigger than the city's number. So when we talk about affordable, the city's affordability is AMI is about 52,000, where the county is about 72, or maybe a little higher. So I know it gets frustrating. We're working with our state delegation to get that changed, but that's where people see the frustration about saying it's affordable, but it's really not affordable. So this money and at home in Tacoma will allow us to look at affordability in a different way and build more units and support even lower rents in Tacoma.
Yeah, it really is that spectrum. We need housing at all those levels. At the 80%, we need some for those who are much less than that.
Yeah,
it's all about having that mix, which is great to see. My very first place that I owned in Tacoma was using that exemption. I was in a small condo building, and it was thanks to that I was able to get in there. So I have personally benefited, and I appreciated it as I was starting that journey. Mayor, you chose the theme for the State of the City this year as transforming our destiny together. In terms of how we think about these, big difficulties about affordable housing, homelessness, how are we going to do that? How are we going to transform our destiny together?
Well, I think Miriam just was a great example when she said they saw that through their shelter, they weren't able to find affordable housing and help transition some of those women who have been through those very hard times. And so they stepped up and said, well, how can we help? Let's build something, right? That's what I mean by together. I mentioned the Rise at 19th. That's something that the Tacoma Housing Authority has done. And I'm sure Jeff could name a lot more. But those are just a couple of projects. So number one, we talk about, affordable housing, we're doing it together. Right? We've got developers, both nonprofit and for-profit developers, who are working with us, who are committed to building affordable housing. With this additional tool and Home in Tacoma, we're going to make it even easier for them to build affordable housing. So that's how we're doing it together. As it relates to addressing homelessness, you'll see on the show. You'll see that Councilmember Ryan Mello has joined us from the county, and the county is stepping up to the plate to really talk about how we work on homelessness, recognizing it's a regional problem. For too long, we've been talking about it only in Tacoma. And Tacoma has 90+% of the supportive services. And so everybody comes to Tacoma, but it really is a regional issue. So addressing it regionally, and then this incredible partnership with Pierce County Coalition to End Homelessness, they've stepped up and called together the entire community to see what can business do, what can other nonprofits do, what can government do, and then the county's put together this group that's going to look at how we end street homelessness by November, right? So it is the reason this theme was chosen. And how we're going to get out of this is focusing on it together. The city is focusing on trying to build more are trying to have access to more shelter in Tacoma and shelter at every level in Tacoma, and shelter for everyone in Tacoma. And we're going to keep focusing on that, but really bringing everyone to the table, because the solution doesn't lie in any one of our organizations. The solution lies in all of our organizations, and all of us play a role in helping to create more affordable housing, but also into ending homelessness.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Mayor. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to watch now the State of the City. So that's going to bring our pre-show to a close. And I want to thank all three of my guests, Miriam, Jeff, Mayor Woodards. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Erik.
Thanks, Erik.
And let's get on with the show.
Let's get on.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
y la república,
for which it stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for
para
all.
todos.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this State of the City conversation on Our Neighbors, a discussion on the important issues of housing and homelessness. Housing and homelessness have been incredibly meaningful topics this year, as we see real estate prices continuing to climb in our region, and we are continuing to be named one of the hottest housing markets in the country. At the same time, some of our neighbors are reporting visible increases of those experiencing homelessness, and this summer, the state moratorium on evictions is slated to end. The city and county are partnering together on rental and utility assistance. The city expended almost $1 million in this past year in rental assistance. And we are currently distributing $6.5 million in U.S. Department of Treasury funds to support rent and utility assistance. We didn't wait for COVID before we acted. With the efforts of the South Sound Housing Affordability Partnership and the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, or as we like to call it, AHAS, we have been focusing on 4 goals. 1 is the creation of new housing. 2, keeping existing housing affordable and in good repair. 3, helping community members stay in their current housing. And number 4, reducing barriers for those who encounter them. Through our nonprofit partners, such as Tacoma Housing Authority and the YWCA, we've seen 241 affordable housing units recently completed. And I'm excited that we're expecting to see 295 more units completed within the next 18 months. And since 2019, there have been 110 regulated units completed through the 12-year multifamily tax exemption. And I'm excited that we'll also be having another 264 rent-regulated units to be slated to be completed in the next 3 years. In addition to the work in housing, the city's budget includes an additional $13 million to address homelessness in 2021 and 2022. The City Council and I have many partners in this work, and it is an honor to be here today with these guests to talk about how we can go further when we work in collaboration with one another. I'd like to take this moment to introduce my guests today. And we have with us the Dean of the School of Urban Studies and Assistant Chancellor for Community Engagement at the University of Washington Tacoma. Wow, Dr. Modarres, that's a long title. To me, that just is a lot of work.
It is.
I can
It is
only,
fun work.
it absolutely, not, work can be fun, but there can still be a lot of it. And then we have Catholic Community Services Agency Director Denny Hunthausen, who I learned will be retiring this year. But Denny, thank you so much for joining us for this very important conversation.
It's great to be here.
And then finally, no stranger to any of us, but currently Pierce County Council member and a member of the SHAPE Steering Committee, Council Member Ryan Mello. So nice to have you here, Ryan.
Great to see you, my friend Mary.
And Ryan's going to tell you a little bit about SHAPE as we discuss further. But thank you all for being here as we discuss what, this section of our program, our neighbors. And housing, affordable housing and homelessness, which is a huge issue in the city of Tacoma. And Dr. Modarres, I don't think there is a person in academia who has spent more time working on these two issues than you, with a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of research. So can you just talk a little bit and kind of explain your view on what we've seen in the housing market during COVID?
Well, thank you for inviting me and being with you. There are lots of experts nationally on the topic. I'm happy to converse about our region and what's going on. We have a very strong housing market. We've been experiencing it for quite a few years. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that we have faced over time is that as the prices have gone up, we have noticed that the beginning of displacement potential, and cost-burdened households, their numbers have expanded beyond what people imagine to be just low-income population to get into the middle-class population, and many of the people who make their household income is below $50,000 right now are basically can be considered a significant number of them, a cost-burdened household. Now, COVID-19 has not slowed down our market. It has made it even more active, and there's a reason for that. The initial research on the topic of the impact of COVID-19 on our cities suggests that despite the trend of the last few decades where downtowns like Seattle, San Francisco, New York, and other places, they began to receive a lot of residents and the cost of housing went up in those localities. During and after COVID, we're going to see a change in the metropolitan settings, where cities of mid-size that are on the edge are going to become the attractive points for younger families and many others who are seeking places where it's close enough, but also not as the same as the downtown regions where they lived. So the suggestion is from the research that we're going to see even a higher housing market, which essentially means that in the forthcoming years, we are going to have housing affordability is going to become a challenge for us across income levels.
So Dr. Modarres, and I think you said it very well. This is not just going to affect just Tacoma. This is going to be a regional issue. It's going to be a state issue, and I think ultimately it's going to become. I mean, in some areas it already is a national issue, but not every community is affected the same. You've been a huge advocate for working regionally on this issue. Can you tell me why that's important?
Well, one of the challenges that we have had in the history of our cities is that through income mechanisms and other racial structures that have been used in the housing market, we have seen segregation. Segregations by income, segregation by race, segregation by ethnicity. One of the challenges is that historically certain spaces and certain cities have become the places where we just simply have put affordable housing there. The challenge of that is that affordable housing is not a single city problem. It's a regional problem. Mm-hmm. Seattle's housing problem and Tacoma's housing problem are the same as Auburn's housing problems and others. So in many ways, to tackle this and not create a future in which we reflect back and see income segregation again accentuated across our regions, is that our cities and our jurisdictions need to work together. Because in working together, issue of affordable housing would be seen as every city's issue as opposed to just one city or one neighborhood's issue. And we need to work against the trend of history now in regional approaches. By doing it this way, the mixed income concept becomes a part of the housing conversation. The fact that people who love us and are with us in the hard times, they should be cared for when we prosper as well. And that would mean that as we begin to think about housing, we think of everyone. We think of elderly, we think of the younger families, we think of the population who barely can afford a two-bedroom rental unit, and we begin to see this sort of a challenge that for us is across all cities. Not one city can solve this problem. And the homelessness that comes from that, homelessness, is a complex topic. Only a portion of it deals with housing. But for a prosperous region, for a region whose housing market is quite strong, the first thing you want to think about is who are we displacing and who cannot get into the housing market again. So we don't add to the problem and aggravate it more while we think about the solution for those who are currently homeless, which includes a lot of children and a lot of the youth in our region, which are in fact the future citizens and current citizens. In fact, it's kind of wrong to talk about kids as a future citizen. They're already citizens.
That is absolutely what I subscribe to.
So in some ways, we have a responsibility to everyone and every geography, which essentially means regional and everyone.
Thank you. Well, Ryan, I can't think of a person, especially working in local government, who believes in collaboration as much as I do than you. And we've had awesome opportunities to work together. But I mean, Dr. Modarres talked about, we've got to look at this as a region. And now as you're a member of the Pierce County Council, and we've worked together through COVID on rental assistance and on food assistance and utility assistance, right? We've done all this work together, and now we're working on housing. But talk about, you know, why is this collaborative approach best for our citizens as government? And then talk a little bit about our partnership that we've been working on.
So thanks for having me as well, Mayor. Always fun to share with your great energy and your great work. I'd love to start with the collaboration that you helped found.
Yeah.
The acronym is SHAPE. Dr. Modarres, I think you had a hand in shaping SHAPE. In this case, SHAPE stands for South Sound Affordable Housing Partnership.
Yep.
And a serious thank you to you, Mayor, for your leadership. My predecessor, former County Councilmember Connie Ladenburg, and our County Executive Bruce Stanmeyer put a ton of energy into bringing all the mayors together in the South Sound to do just what Dr. Modarres is talking about, is to bring the leadership together to think at a true regional scale about how do we collaborate to get better outcomes across the income continuum on housing. So folks have been meeting regularly, taking it very seriously for about 2 years. You can really show, it demonstrates the commitment that mayors and leaders are at the table month in and month out, talking about what is it going to take to coordinate around housing supply and housing policy. So it's really exciting.
I think it's been really fun, and it's so great to now have you a part of that team as we move forward that issue. But the county, and the county itself is still working on those kinds of policies. So those kinds of policies as well. So in your opinion, why does this collaborative approach work best?
Yeah, there's no other way to do it. No community can tackle housing alone. So for me, it's a non-starter to do it alone.
Yeah.
We just fundamentally can't tackle the scale of the problem. And I think it's one of the things that I think Pierce County and Tacoma do well is convene folks, act as a catalyst and act as a convener to bring the parties together to figure out how can we bring our assets together, and how do we make change together, and not going it alone. So I think collaboration is essential.
Well, we've talked about kind of the affordability piece of housing, but there's another conversation to be had here, and that's kind of those who are affected by this affordability crisis, and that's our homeless community. I mean, our houseless community, right? They are members of our community, and they're valued members that we can't at this point. In some cases, we have shelter for some, not for all. But Denny, you've been at this work for 38 years. And so we're so grateful for your leadership, but you understand the importance of providing that shelter and all the services that go with it to help our community transition from shelter to, when we get more affordable housing, into houses, because that's what we're focused on. But Denny, of all the things that you've seen happen in your 38 years, I got to imagine this last year has been pretty hard, especially for Catholic Community Services, an organization that works all over the city and the county providing these types of services. Tell us about the changes that you've seen and how we can better address this issue of homelessness in our community.
Thank you. Yeah, we've of course had to practice all the social distancing in this context. And unlike those of us that can go home and separate, people living in congregate care facilities like a shelter can't do that. So we had to really put measures in place to keep them safe. And that, of course, reduced our ability, the number of people we serve. So we had to come up with other approaches. And fortunately, we did some things, and they did in other places as well, put folks up, our most vulnerable, up in hotels. And there they can, of course, have their own room and be separated. And that, of course, required us to do a whole lot of things differently with meals, with staffing, and that kind of thing. But folks are very resilient. I mean, I think what's remarkable about what happened, a lot of us were very concerned that this population was was going to run rampant COVID-19 through this population. And actually, we really didn't see that. And I think a lot of kudos go to our staff, to the homeless themselves, in the way that they took this to heart and practiced it, because we know, it's very contagious. And so we really didn't see an uptick in any significance for any consistent time anyway among the population. And we were able to keep them safe, not just us, but really, I think, across the providers. So that's been great. And through adversity, you hopefully, when you can get out of the crisis, the immediate crisis, you innovate.
Right.
And I think we're trying different things. And the hotel model would never have been tried had we not had this crisis. There's no one solution. We got to be thinking about a lot of things. We also started doing much more in terms of the tiny home stuff as a community. Not ourselves, but so we're seeing all these different approaches. I think we are clear to say, for homeless folks, shelter can't be, emergency shelter can't be the only answer. We've got to do all these other strategies along the continuum. But of course, the key thing is to create more permanent supportive housing and affordable housing up the continuum. Because as we know, people move through housing, right? As their situation improves, they get better housing. One of the things that I think it'd be interesting to hear, Dr. Maris, you speak to this, but because of the lack of mobility in the economy and just in general people not moving, we didn't see many people move out of our housing. Of course, there's been a eviction moratorium. And so you kind of, it really puts a halt to this progression that people tend to experience. And that's made it challenging. So a lot of resilience, kudos go to our staff, to our homeless brothers and sisters, bucking up through this. And they really have shown a lot of resilience.
Well, and I would think, Denny, too, you talk about, we talk about CCS as a provider, but we have many providers in this community that have worked together. Can you talk a little bit how you all have used this collaborative spirit to support those who are homeless in our community?
Yeah, well, I think initially we shared how we're approaching various practices as we had small outbreaks, because you've got your staff to think about and the folks you're serving. All of those dynamics really created challenges for us. So we were talking a lot to the other providers. We work closely with the Rescue Mission, of course, Associated Ministries, a number of other providers in the community. Through the coalitions, there's regular, engagement with city and county staff. They often convene us because we're in, partnership there. There's a lot of good conversation that happens. I think some of the more meaningful stuff is when we get our staff together at the program level. So myself and Duke at the Rescue Mission have done that a couple of times, where we've really gotten our leadership staff who are actually running the shelters and doing the staff to kind of, there's a certain, you only understand what it's like when you're with other people that do the work, right? So that mutual support's been very important, and I think it helps us really complement each other's work more intentionally and with understanding and insight in that regard.
Well, I know, and then we've had our, we have our providers, their partners that you mentioned, who provide services, and then we've had other great partners step up, like Bellarmine, stepped forward and gave their gym up because we had to do social distancing, and now we've got churches who have opened up to help us. So I mean, there is this real collaborative spirit in Tacoma and how we care for our community. So Dr. Modarres, you've heard us talk about homelessness, and we're talking about affordability. Do you see the connection between our hot housing market and the increasingly visible homelessness community that we're seeing?
There is a connection, but as I said, homelessness also has different dimensions to it. And so the housing portion of it, definitely. I think one of the things that we might not see, and this is the part that I want to emphasize, is that not everyone who becomes homeless stays in the region. And therefore the displacement that happens and follows a housing price hikes is that it would push people away And they won't be in Tacoma. They will not be anywhere to be seen close by, because as the service providers reach capacity, this population needs to move. We know from research on homeless population that that population follows services as well. So capacity of handling that size of homeless population is very difficult for a city by itself. Again, that's a regional issue, right? It's not really a single city issue. And the more service providers work with jurisdictions, I think there will be a learning opportunity, the same way that around affordable housing policies and toolkits, we will have a learning opportunity about what is the role of different sectors of the society in dealing with the homeless population, not just the service providers, who are the end point of the service provision, right?
Yeah. Well, it obviously takes all of us, and there is a huge effect. But I appreciate it's the service providers. It's understanding the impacts of our affordability crisis. But it also is bringing together, again, I love this continued, if I could have set this up any better, right? I love this continued thought of that about collaboration, and we've got to look at everything, and there's not one solution. But Councilmember Mello, the Pierce County Council, in partnership with the Tacoma Pierce County Coalition to End Homelessness, you all put it in writing that we have a goal and are focused on ending street homelessness by November of 2021. That's a huge goal, especially given the fact that we know that when we come out of this pandemic, that the moratorium is going to be over. The moratorium on evictions is going to be over, and thank God for ARP, for the American Rescue Plan, and the support that's coming there. We'll hopefully be able to help people stay in their houses. But you all have made this commitment, Ryan. Councilmember Mello, you all have made this commitment. Talk a little about this commitment and how we're going to go about making that happen.
Yeah, so excited that the County Council created this ad hoc committee to end street homelessness. The goal is bold, as you noted, trying to end street homelessness by November of this year. So bringing together homelessness care providers like Denny and his team and the other experts in the field, City of Tacoma, City of Lakewood, Puyallup, the county, to come together and put together a plan. And what we told folks who are participating is, tell it to us straight. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't put a political lens on it or what's possible. We said, tell us what the extent of the problem is, how much it's going to cost, and what are the best strategies to get there. We'll do the next layer of the tough work to figure out, okay, how do we make that so? But tell it to us straight. And so that's what this plan to end street homelessness is going to come to us here in the next couple of weeks. We'll digest it, and then it's time for people like you and I, Mayor, to roll up our sleeves to really hear what the experts told us and figure out what we can do. It's going to be expensive. We got to get real, right? It's going to be expensive. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to have, I think, a really clear, truthful, unadulterated plan to work from. And it's not going to be easy, but we're going to roll up our sleeves, and I think we can get there.
You know, you can't change what you don't completely understand, and our community, people like Denny and CCS who do this work every day, they've got to inform us. And I think the other thing that's been really great about the coalition and work that's been done around the city is that we also need to talk to those who are experiencing homelessness and ask them what's it going to take for them.
Absolutely.
And so Denny, as you work with this population every day, as your organization does, and I'm sure you hear a lot about what we can do. What is the most important thing that a city or a county or a region can do to help those experiencing homelessness to transition to long-term housing? What can we do?
Well, I think it begins a bit with what we don't do. We don't blame them, right?
Right.
They can't be the cause. And that's understandable. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of concern. But I think we're seeing, again, adversity and what it can create. We hadn't seen models like the hotel model. I've been working actually out in Puyallup for 3-4 years, I forget how long now, to try and do something around homelessness. And isn't it ironic that in the time of pandemic is when they finally step up and do some things? Yeah. We're doing a modest hotel model with street homeless folks. They're about to launch, I understand, a tiny village situation. So this is really hopeful that some new approaches are being tried. I think what we're hearing, just as an example from folks that are homeless, is, and we targeted our most vulnerable, what's surprising is that an incredible number, we had 60 people in our shelter when the pandemic hit that were over 60 or had a chronic underlying health condition.
Wow.
We have elderly homeless in our community. Now, a lot of them tend to come where we are because we have a 24/7 concept, you know, where they can be in the same building during the day and so on, so they gravitate there naturally. But to get them into their own room, the measure of dignity that they experience and their expression and appreciation for that, where they have their own bathroom, they have their own bed, you know, their own living place, meals. The hotel's been great right downtown here. They actually said, yeah, we'll take the breakfast. Breakfast is included, you know, because it's no hotel deal. And they figured out how to deliver it to their door each day. So this sort of experience for folks who have had really a challenging life, and to have that then, it's amazing to see that. And you know, we're going to have these additional funds come in, but when you look at the cost of developing a new shelter, developing, growing, you know, siting some of that stuff versus doing that. We're also in Clark and Vancouver County, we just agreed to a contract. We're going to be doing a model down there that's quite a bit more adventurous in a hotel situation. So that's not the panacea, but I think that, you know, we've got to think out of the box a little bit in this time and do some things perhaps differently. Those are not permanent arrangements, but they might be a bridge. And these are also facilities, especially if we have a property under duress, that could be thought of in an interim approach with that could ultimately be turned into permanent housing, you know, down the road. So, yeah, I think we're really seeing a spotlight on things we can do that add a measure of dignity. People have more space. We've created barriers, a little bit more privacy in these settings. That's helped. Yeah.
But I think, Denny, one of the things that is clearly missing as we have this conversation, we've had it a lot, is not just permanent housing, but permanent supportive housing, which is something we don't have a lot of in Tacoma. Denny, can you talk, and maybe just talk a little bit about what that is and what that means and the difference that can make in the lives of some of the members in our community who are houseless?
You bet. It's intended to focus on the population that's most difficult to serve. So if you look at, it's a relatively small number of people. This is true across many systems, but in homeless, it's the same. They take up an inordinate amount of resources because they're in and out of the jail, the emergency department. They take, at the hospitals, they take a lot of law enforcement attention because they've got mental illness, other kinds of challenges. And so if you create what is essentially low barrier housing to house them, unconditionally, really, that's what the intent is, you can really have systemic impact. You can reduce the impact of that population on much of the community and allow the providers of homeless services in general to not be, you know, it's the old 90-10 personnel reference, right? And so you're trying to say, let's do something significant with that group, house them, make their lives more stable. You know, their calls to the ER go down. If they're a substance user, that has a harm reduction approach. They end up using less, all of those kinds of things. And they're able to become much more stable and functional in their daily lives. So, but that requires 24/7 staffing. You have to have a controlled access building. You have to have a staff front desk. You have to have other support staff because our greatest failure is that anyone would ever be evicted out of that property. You know, in Nativity House Apartments, that's who we intentionally house. Think of that. We're trying to actually house the most difficult. It's amazing. I think we've had about 5 evictions in 5 years. So that's housing the most challenging population from among the homeless. Boy, it is tough, but that's what we're trying to create more of, so that unless we're going to, I always say, this population, they're going to be in our mental health institutions, they're going to be in our hospitals, they're going to be in our jails or prisons. Or we can house them in permanent supportive housing.
And give them the services they need to be successful.
We just have to face that set of options. Or have them on our streets, in our business doorways, in our parks, all the rest of it.
Which is neither fair to them
nor the community,
or the
neighborhood.
community at large. But we've got to take care of it's our duty as a city to take care of everyone. So we're going to wrap up real quickly, but I just want to ask you, what's the one thing, if you all in a short sentence, tell us the one thing that that's missing in our local conversations, and then tell me the one thing that you think we're doing right. I mean, we know this is a very complex issue, won't be solved overnight, but tell us one thing we're doing good, and one thing we need to focus on, or one thing we need to learn. Dr. Modarres, I'll start with you.
Great. So let me premise this by saying that I'm going to do this in reverse order. This region and this community is really good at getting together and talking and interacting with each other and trying to learn from each other. I have not seen the like of it. This is exciting to see how often people are willing to come together. In terms of the thing that we need to do is that I think, given the level of growth that we have seen in this region, I'm talking about the region, the one thing that we haven't done, but we are beginning to do really well, is to think about every issue that we have. Because housing connects to education, housing connects to health, housing connects to service provision. There's a series of things that we need to do. So the one thing that I'm looking forward to is a holistic assessment of quality of life for everyone. And what would that look like? And given that we come together to talk often, is to actually take that hard look at issues that we have assumed that couldn't be solved and try to see if we can solve them.
Denny.
Gosh, the most exciting thing, I worked over my career on a bond initiative and a levy in the city to create dedicated resources for affordable housing development. So to see 1590 pass the council, now that there wasn't public vote, but I'm so thankful to you and the city council for approving that. That can really have an impact. We need to make sure that it's a real bright star in our local situation because it's dedicated local resources. This isn't channeling something from outside.
Yes.
And that's really exciting. We need to make sure that it will, in some significant way, continue to serve the lowest income and provide some measure of supportive services because of that being a component. And it's really exciting to see that it can be bonded so we can leverage that and do more and do it more quickly.
And what did we learn? For every dollar that we spend through this bonding capacity, we generate 17 more dollars going into affordable housing in our community. So tough decision, tough time to do it, but the right thing to do.
You bet.
Ryan?
The thing I want to see more of is data that are driving our decisions. These are really big decisions that need to be informed, and you can't make, I think, smart, long-lasting policy decisions if you don't have good data. And the housing space is so complicated. The tools it's going to take to make sure that nurses and firefighters and teachers have quality housing are going to be the different tools than, you know, the folks who are at the lower income of our community, much less the folks who don't have any income or just live off of Social Security or something like that. So the data needs to drive our decisions, and we need more of it in order to make regionally good decisions. The thing that I'm really excited about and want more of is innovation. We heard some of that from both of our friends today, innovation of using hotels that aren't being used in the pandemic because people aren't traveling. The faith community coming to the table and saying, city, here's what I need you to change in your permitting and land use processes. Because guess what, we got a parish hall that's empty right now and we want to help. There's great work happening by other providers like Comprehensive Life Resources, figuring out how to get upstream on youth homelessness to change the cycle of poverty of homeless, starting with youth. So the innovation is energizing, and it's out there, and we just want to help make it happen.
Well, I am so energized, speaking of energized, so energized by the three of you, and so grateful that you would join me today as we talk about our neighbors. This is among one of the most difficult conversations that we're having as a community because there are so many facets to this issue and it's so complex. And as you heard from this conversation, it won't be easily solved. But what you heard today is that if we collaborate together and continue not just to talk, Dr. Modarres, but to actually take more action, that it is a solvable issue if we focus on it together. While this issue is immense, and you just heard Councilmember Mello talk about we need innovation, we are still bringing innovative tools online to address this issue. Things like SHAPE, the South Sound Housing Affordability, Accessibility, and Attainability Partnership. And then another example that I'm proud to announce today is that we are going to be implementing a new foreclosure prevention program, which will be launching now. And in partnership with Pierce County and the Habitat for Humanity, applicants can get up to 4 months of mortgage assistance with a limit of $6,000 per household. So the conversations that we were just having when we talk about the eviction moratorium being over, there are going to be programs like this that will assist our community members. So please make sure that either you or if you know someone who needs the assistance, please get them to apply. We're hopeful that we're going to be able to help as many families as possible in Tacoma and Pierce County. I hope you'll continue to stay tuned to our next conversation, where we'll talk about our community in this series of transforming our destiny together and the 2021 State of the City Address. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.